Hello, Whitefish. Getting pretty brisk out there, isn't it? If you're like me, fall in Montana has a magical way of turning my wardrobe into a confusing mix of shorts and sweaters. It's the only season where you can simultaneously be too hot in the sun and freezing cold in the shade. Congratulations are in order to our newly re-elected city council members. Rebecca, Steve, and Frank will be back for an exciting new season of Whitefish City Council, arguably one of my favorite shows on YouTube. Today's guest is Senator Jon Tester, a third-generation Montana farmer, former school teacher, and the only Democrat who holds statewide office in Montana. He is the chairman of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee and the chairman of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Defense. He also serves on the Senate Banking Committee, the Senate Commerce Committee, and the Senate Committee on Indian Affairs. Jon and his wife Sharla still farm the same land that was homesteaded by Jon's grandparents in 1912. We covered a broad range of topics, including affordable housing, climate change, and the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East. We even talked about UFOs. What are those things anyway? Senator Tester is arguably one of the most productive and hardworking politicians in DC right now. I'm sure grateful he's representing our beautiful state. Be sure to keep an eye out for him next year when he hits the Montana campaign trail. Today's episode is brought to you by Thrivers Coffee. If you would like to help support the fight against human trafficking, visit thriverscoffee.com to order your coffee and make a difference today. And now, my interview with Senator Jon Tester.
How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule.
I think this is the second podcast I've ever been on.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I think the first one was, who's the Obama dude in Chicago?
David Axelrod.
Axelrod's podcast.
Oh, that's awesome. How's DC today?
DC is just normal, which is pretty abnormal for the rest of the world, but it's fine. It's, the weather here's, probably on average 20, 30 degrees warmer than in Montana. But there's some big issues we got to take care of, and I haven't felt the urgency to get some of this stuff done like should be done. We've got supplemental for Ukraine and Israel, and
right.
We've got appropriation bills. We got 9 of those left to do in the Senate. We've got a farm bill. We've got an NDAA. We've got a FAA bill. So we've got a lot of work to do, and hopefully we'll get a little more urgency to get some of this stuff done.
Well, we're lucky to have you helping with all this. Before we tackle some of these issues, I'm super curious, how was your farming season this year?
So compared to the last 2 years, which were the 2 worst years we've ever had, and by the way, my grandmother and grandfather homesteaded the place we were on. My grandfather came out in 1910, so we've been on this place for 110 plus years. 21 and 22 was the worst years we've ever had. And I can say that with some certainty because my mom was alive and we had the droughts in the 80s. And I had talked to her and she said, you got more moisture in the 30s than we got in the 80s. And then 21 and 22 came around. We had about a third of a crop. And then in 21, we had a hailstorm that made my fields look like a linoleum floor.
Oh.
And so there isn't much left of that. And then 22, we just had drought. And so this year, the good news is we cut a almost average crop that was pretty damn good, quite honestly. And it was kind of fun to have harvest and get the truck drivers excited about keeping the combine running in the field and all that stuff. So it was a good year. We'll take another one just like it next year.
What do you grow?
This year we had red wheat, we had white wheat, we had malt barley, we had peas, and then I put some millet in, but I planted it too doggone thick, so it didn't do very well. It burned up. And then we put up quite a bit of hay in the big round, so it was a busy summer. It was good.
Oh, wow. Well, it's been interesting. Since COVID, Montana has seen a huge migration of people coming to Montana to visit and to live here. And it's interesting. People tend to see Montana as this big, bold, majestic place. But when you grow up here, you notice how fragile our ecosystems are, especially in the face of climate change. You know, over here in Whitefish, the winters are starting later, putting our ski resorts at risk. Last year's low snowpack and warm spring brought Flathead Lake down to historic lows, and droughts are certainly impacting agriculture. So sometimes I think Montana is a canary in the coal mine in the face of climate change. So I'm wondering, how might Montana adapt as the climate changes exponentially faster?
Well, look, I think climate change is certainly a huge problem. I would say that Alaska and Florida are more the canaries in the coal mine, but the truth is it's having major impacts on Montana. If I have my druthers, I think we've got to look for research and technology to get us out of this mess in the forms of new energy sources and in the forms of affordable battery technology. I think that's how we get out of it. You get out of it by using less carbon-based fuels. I mean, that's the way it is. And by the way, that transition doesn't happen overnight. It happens over time. A lot of folks back here in Washington, D.C. think you can just turn off the spigot and climate change is fixed and you don't have to worry about burning carbon-based fuels. But the fact of the matter is, I don't have the capability of farming right now without using diesel fuel. It doesn't work for me. So we get to a point where I can get a electrically powered tractor that kicks out 375 drawbar horse that I can charge with energy that is not carbon-based fuel, then we'll be well on our way to solving this problem from a Montana perspective. But I think it all starts, and I think it starts with research and development, and it ends with commercialization. And I think if we can get things out there that can keep our economy going and in my case, keep agriculture going, that is competitively priced, I think people will jump to it in a heartbeat.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. And I think people forget that we've only been using fossil fuels for 100 years. We haven't even been using them that long, and we're already recognizing the dangers they pose. So I feel hopeful that we're heading in a hopefully better direction.
I would just tell you, and I think this is an important issue because it is a massive issue for this country and certainly a massive issue for future generations. But the truth is I don't think you regulate your way out of this. I think you innovate your way out of this. I think I think from the federal government, we've got to put money into research to let loose our best minds in the university system. And I think we'll come up with some great ideas on not only energy generation, but also battery technology, which is critically important for transportation.
Yep. I agree. So what's interesting is you teamed up with Republican Senator Mike Rounds from South Dakota to introduce what I find to be a brilliant piece of bipartisan legislation called the PASS Act. Can you explain what it is and why it is so important to our national security?
We've got 4 major countries out there that really don't like us much. You've got North Korea, you got Iran, you got China, you got Russia. Those folks, as I went around the state earlier this spring talking about farm bill stuff, it was brought up to me more than once as, what's going on here? Is China buying this land? Is Russia buying this land? Mainly those 2 countries, but the others are concerned too. We did some checking. There was an Air Force base in North Dakota that was pretty well documented that a Chinese company that was affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party had bought land and they were going to put a processing plant on it within earshot of an Air Force base. And that was going to happen until that community stood up and said, hell no, we're not going to let this happen. And then it didn't. Well, I think it's much better to be a little proactive on this stuff. And so, proactive is let's stop it before it gets purchased, before they start talking about putting a processing facility, or before they start, running tractors up and down the land or whatever they're going to do with it. And so I teamed up with Republican Senator Mike Rounds, got a piece of legislation that I think is important. And I think it just allows our agencies to take a look at folks that are buying land. If they're affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party, they can't do it. It isn't passed yet, but we're working on it, and we're making headway, and I got a notion it might be passed by the end of the year. But I think it's really important. In fact, I think it's a no-brainer to make sure that we don't undermine American farmland and we don't undermine our national security. And that's really the gist behind it.
Oh, that's amazing. I know Arizona did something similar because there was companies that were Saudi Arabian that were growing alfalfa and shipping it back to Saudi Arabia because it's illegal to grow alfalfa in Saudi Arabia because it's so water intensive for their dairy farms.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
I was just down in Arizona, and they just shut that off. And
wow.
And I think it's smart myself.
Speaking of farmland, here in the Flathead, we're beginning to see the unfortunate urbanization of farmland, whether it's housing developments. We're seeing a lot of storage units pop up, but there is a push to mitigate it through some conservation. There's a great new nonprofit here called Save Farmland, who aims to acquire local farmland to preserve for next generation farmers. But with big ag and large meat packers eating up more of the market, how do we make it easier for small farms and ranchers to prosper and inspire the next generation of Montanans to get into these tough industries?
Well, we've got some advantages in Montana, and I'll get to those advantages in a second. But the truth is, it all starts with the Farm Bill. We got to make sure a Farm Bill works for the small producers, for the family farms, for the young people that want to get into agriculture. We've got to have programs that help them get established and then pull back, because I think that's how you keep young people on the ground. I'm probably wired a different way, because when I was 8 years old, I told my folks I wanted to run the farm. I got two older brothers. One of them spent a life in the service, and the other spent a life being a veterinarian. So I was lucky because they were older than me, and they wanted to do that, and I wanted to farm. It has been a great life. People ask me over and over again, this Senate job's got to be the best thing you've ever done. Look, it's an incredible honor, and it's a great job, but the best job I ever done is farming. Because you're feeding people, you're making sure the country's secure, and it's just good, honest work, I'm telling you. And so we've got to have a farm bill that supports that. That doesn't support corporate ag. They're going to be fine. They're going to do what they need to do. They've got so many ways to make the ends meet financially that they don't need the help of the American taxpayer. But the small startup farms do.
Yep.
And I don't think it should be forever and ever, by the way.
Yeah.
But to help them get them on their feet and get them going. And I think that's how you make it easier for people to stay on the land. I will also tell you this. For people that get older and want to get out of the business, we ought to give some tax breaks for them to sell to young people that aren't in the business, okay? We need to clear that up because, quite frankly, if my grandson takes over our farm, which I'm hoping he will do, he shouldn't get a break. He's going to take over my farm. There shouldn't be any break on me giving it to my grandkid. I mean, you're kidding me? That's going to happen. That needs to happen. And for those parents that don't pass their farm on to their kids because they want the money to go buy a place somewhere else, shame on them. Because the truth is, it's the next generation that we're living on this earth for. We're renting this earth from them.
Yep.
And so let's set up a tax system that works and gives benefits to people who help keep that land in agricultural production and help keep it not in the corporate ag's hands, but into the next generation of good young farmers that are out there, and there's plenty of them. And so that's what's important. And then the last thing is this. There's a really important tool called conservation easements that are out there that may be what you're talking about, Save Farmland utilizes. But you've got some of the best farmland in Montana and Creston. Creston is the premier land. We shouldn't be building houses on that land. That land grazes food like no other land in the state of Montana. We ought to keep it raising food. And so let's use conservation easements and other tools out there to make sure that land doesn't end up being a housing development, but yet it stays in production agriculture.
Oh, absolutely. I've been reading this book, Killers of the Flower Moon, which is being made into a movie by Scorsese. It actually stars a local hometown hero, Lily Gladstone, who's Blackfeet and was born in Kalispell. But what's heartbreaking about that book is it really highlights how the indigenous communities have just been systemically neglected and betrayed in our nation's history. You live near the Rocky Boys Reservation. I live here between the CSKT and the Blackfeet, and I've got amazing friends from both communities. But sadly, Montana is one of the most dangerous states to live in if you're an indigenous woman. Justice is rarely seen by families of MMIW. As a senior member of the Senate Indian Affairs Committee, how have you worked with the tribes to address these issues, such as MMIW, water rights?
Yeah. Well, I think, look, I was raised my whole life, lived within 100 miles of Rocky Boy Indian Reservation. I was born in Havre, farmed out of Big Sandy, went to college in Great Falls, and then went back to farm and farmed. So Native American issues have been there. But I will tell you, when I was younger, did not understand, didn't understand the culture, didn't understand the challenges, didn't understand much about Native Americans.
Yeah.
And they were within 25 miles of my house.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand it. Now, when I was in the state legislature, we passed Indian Education for All. I think that was a great step to let everybody understand, or at least start to understand, the challenges out there in Indian country, because they are many. And if people understand them, then I think we can work together to get them solved. That being said, when it comes to MMIW, when it comes to water rights, sovereignty, self-determination, schools, police protection, drugs, crime, poverty, I can help at the federal level, and I do help. But the truth is the solutions have to come from the Native Americans. You can't have somebody like me saying, this is what you got to do if you want to be successful.
Yeah.
I can make recommendations to them, and I do.
Yep.
But ultimately, they have to buy into them, and they have to come up with the solutions. And then we need to help them make those solutions come to reality.
Yeah.
MMIW is a prime example. There's not a lot of trust between Indian people and law enforcement, and there's a reason for that, and it's not a false reason. Generationally, I'm talking about. I'm not talking about lately. I'm talking generationally. We've got to break that wall down so that people understand. By the way, as I learned when I was a little kid, that the police officer isn't your enemy, he's your friend. And if you got a problem, you don't want to run away from them, you want to go to them.
Right.
And if we're able to do that and get these crimes reported in a timely manner, it gives us a much better chance of getting them solved and in finding the victims much quicker. Police work's a lot like healthcare. The first couple hours are really critically important, and when a crime happens, just like when you get hurt, the first couple hours are really important if you're going to survive. And so making sure that our Native American folks know who to get a hold of, making sure that we have adequate law enforcement, whether it's FBI or whether it's BIA or whether it's local law enforcement that the tribe hires, is really important. And making sure that once these folks who commit the crimes are caught, and that they're prosecuted, and that they do the time for the crime. And I think that will move things forward as far as MMIW goes. For water rights, we got the last water right just about done in Washington, D.C. We got it through the Senate. We got to get it through the House. We're getting some pushback from the House. They don't want to do it. I'm going to need some help from the folks on the other side of the aisle to get this done. But the truth is it's teed up on the tee, and we damn well better get Fort Belknap done. And that's the last one. And that gives them, and by the way, the entire state, security when it comes to water rights. And I think that's important. Yeah. The other thing is we need to educate the folks that are here, and I'm sorry for talking too much, but we need to educate the
No, you're great.
folks here on sovereignty, because it's really important that people understand that sovereignty and self-determination are pretty unique to Indians.
Oh, completely. Yep. And, there was a young woman who was unfortunately involved in a vehicular homicide named Micah Westwolf. And this was like a year ago, or maybe 2 years ago. And the woman who killed her was just finally charged and is facing trial. So, justice is rarely seen, but luckily the mother, who's going to be on my show in a few weeks, is finally getting justice. So it's just sad that it just takes so long.
Yeah, look, in some of these cases are declined, they're not even taken up, and that's even worse. So delayed justice is not justice that's given, but no justice at all is even worse.
Oh, absolutely. You did a remarkable thing this year. You got not one, but two of your bills passed into law, which, if I understand, no one else has done in Congress this year. And as impressive as that is, it's the content of these bills that's extraordinary, because they deal with supporting our veterans. Can you talk about these two bills a little bit and why they're significant? Yeah,
well, I serve as chairman of the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. It's a big job because we got a lot of veterans in this country. We got a lot of veterans in Montana. In fact, second highest per capita in the nation. Making sure we do right by our veterans is a high priority for me. I think it's a high priority for the country with an all-volunteer military. So we've gotten some bills done. Look, we passed the PACT Act last year, which was a great bill for toxic-exposed veterans. Biggest expansion of VA health care ever. And it's doing right by our veterans, making sure our veterans get what they need. We did the John Scott Hannon the year before that, which deals with mental health. Both those bills need to continue to get implemented in a way that meets our veterans' needs. Recently, I was able to get the COLA increase for our veterans, which is really important because folks that are retired, service-connected disabilities, and the survivors of those folks, with inflation, they've got to make sure that the COLAs match up with inflation as much as possible. That was important. We got a major Medical Facilities Act introduced that's going to help with building facilities, including some work being done at Fort Harrison. And then we got some other legislative bills done with folks who are disabled and making sure those exams get done on a timely basis so that doesn't get held up. So yeah, we're moving and grooving, and it's a good committee. We got a lot of good folks. We just got to make sure that we continue to move the ball forward for our veterans, because there's a whole new generation of folks that want to serve, and if we don't treat our veterans with the respect and the dignity that they have earned, they're not likely to join the military, and we need folks in our military if we're going to protect our freedoms in this country.
Oh, absolutely. So affordable housing was the topic most requested of my audience to ask you about. According to a recent report, Montana's median home value is 4 times higher than the state's median income. Here in Whitefish, the median house price in 2007 was $320,000, but in 2023, it rose to a breathtaking $1.3 million, according to stats from the city of Whitefish. The short-term rental market has pushed out a lot of Montanans from their homes and even forced some onto the streets. So it just feels really daunting for young people trying to buy their first home, among other things. As a member of the Banking, Housing, and Urban Affairs Committee, what is the sentiment of this issue amongst your peers, and how do you hope to see this problem play out?
So housing is a huge issue. That's why your listeners brought it up. That and child care I probably hear as much about as any two issues that are out there. And I would just tell you, they're not easy solutions. But the truth is there are solutions. And I think that if we're able to work with the different alphabet soup of agencies that are out there, USDA, HUD, and others, and make sure that we're moving their programs away, in other words, funding their programs in a way that can help lower costs, that's number one. Number two, I don't think the fix is from the federal level. I think the fix is in part from the federal level, using those alphabet soup agencies. But it's also the state has to pitch in. The state had $2 billion this last year. They could have dedicated some of it to affordable housing. They chose not to. I think that's a big mistake for businesses because the truth is if a business doesn't have employees, a place to live, they can't expand. I think it's very short-sighted on the governor and the legislature's part. But they did that. They decided not to use it for much of anything but giving people like me $2,500, which I appreciate. But I'd sure like to have, as a businessman, I'd like to have places for employees to be able to live that they can afford to live in. That's really important. And and then the local communities also play a really, really important role, especially in zoning and impact fees. And look, I know it costs money to build housing developments, and I know that we don't want the rest of the taxpayers to pay for a housing development that's being built there. And I think you can do that. But there's opportunities to help cut those impact fees and make the zoning rules not quite as onerous as some communities have. And that's how I think we've done. Plus, bring in the private sector, bringing in the financial institutions, bringing in the builders, and saying, all right, guys, what can we do to help move this ball forward? And I think if everybody gets in the room, you can do it. And I think it can be done. But it hasn't been done yet. And look, housing prices will stabilize over time. The problem is it may take 20 years to make that happen. I think with some supplements from the federal level, state level, local level, I think we can get our arms around this issue much more quicker. We
are witnessing 2 very scary wars right now in the Middle East and in Ukraine. The fear is that these are the beginnings of a larger global conflict. But the last thing Americans want are American boots on the ground. However, many are also opposed to funding Ukraine's defense to the extent that we are. Can you make the case why we need to be supporting Ukraine right now? And what would happen if Russia did eventually win that area and took over that region?
Well, I would tell you, I think we are in a very dangerous time. I mean, I think it's as dangerous time as it was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. When I was in first grade and the teachers told to get under your desk in case of a nuclear attack, I don't know what the hell good that would have done, but that's what they told us. I remember it vividly 61 years ago. When it comes to Ukraine, I will say this, and I've been over to Poland and Lithuania, and I've talked to Ukrainians that have come out of the war zone. I have never seen people that were more hungry for freedom than those people in my life. Never. They are very worried about Putin. Putin has said he's going to reunite the USSR, and I think we ought to take him at his word. And for that reason, the Ukrainians say, you know, we were under your thumb at one time, we didn't like it, and we don't want to go back. And they're fighting with their lives, and they're fighting to stop Putin and this unnecessary, unprovoked war that he implemented almost 2 years ago. The reason the United States needs to support this is because we need to read our history books. And I'm not being overdramatic here. What happened in World War II is real. It can happen again. History tends to repeat itself. So we ought to be supporting the Ukrainians for the sake of democracy, for the sake of our forefathers, and defeat Putin. Defeat this clown, because he's no good. He is no good. He's no good for the world. He's no good for Europe. He's certainly no good for Ukraine. And if we don't do that, by the president of Ukraine's own mouth said, we will lose this war in 6 months if we don't have the United States helping us. Then Putin wins. Then he takes over Ukraine. Then he looks around and says, who's next? And you can go to Poland right now and ask the Polish people who they think is next, and they'll say, we're next. That's a NATO country.
Right.
We have a pact, by the way, and a necessary pact with our NATO allies that says, you attack one, you attack all. If you want to make sure, and by the way, we don't have one soldier in Ukraine. This whole war is being implemented by the Ukrainians. We're helping them with information, but the truth is they're the ones doing the work. There's the ones that are putting their lives on the line. That whole scenario changes with an invasion of Poland, and then you've got a world war,
right? And
then you got real problems. And so what I would say is Ukraine's fight against Putin to stop Putin is a fight worth supporting. And if we don't do it, we're making a huge mistake that will have generational negative impacts on this country.
Oh. You know, I have a question. I was wondering if you could speak to this. I kind of want to turn to what's happening between Israel and Hamas, which is also kind of a worst case scenario right now. And a lot of eyes I've been noticing are on Hezbollah, as they have been having skirmishes with Israel since this all started. I was wondering if you can speak to how might America respond if Israel gets into a substantial conflict with Hezbollah, which is thoroughly backed by Iran, which also has the support of Russia. Yeah. So it's like, man, this is really kind of getting not only scary, but insanely tricky, or vice versa.
Yeah, it's really tricky. And I will tell you that you mentioned something that not a lot of people think about, Russia. They're right there behind Hamas, and they're right there behind Hezbollah, along with Iran. And so this bears watching, and it's, by the way, it goes back to the Ukrainian fight. It's why Ukraine is fighting. Why? Russia. Okay, I'm going to tell you there's a reason why the fleets are in the Mediterranean. There's a reason why there's a submarine in the Mediterranean, and it's all as a prevention measure to show these folks that if they look to expand this war, it's not something they should be doing because of the impacts that will happen. What happened, just to back up a bit, what happened on October 7th with Hamas coming across the line and killing hundreds and hundreds of Israelis and taking pictures with GoPro cameras and putting it up on the internet is horrific, insane, and not tolerable. And I don't think we should ever deny Israel's their ability to defend themselves. I would also tell you the pictures coming out of Gaza have been very disturbing too.
Yep.
And we need to make sure that Israel follows international law, and we need to make sure that they're bombing in Gaza, make sure to the best of our ability that it's targeted
Right.
to Hamas leadership, which, by the way, tend to use civilians to protect themselves.
Right.
And so that's where the problem arises. But I will tell you that there are a lot of things going on right now in the world that will keep you up at night if you think about them much. And we hope that cooler heads will prevail, and that people will understand that getting into a war is not it's not beneficial for anybody in the end.
It's not. But yet it just seems to be part of human nature for whatever terrible reason. Yeah. Yeah.
You're 100% correct. That's right. It's been since the beginning of time.
Well, I just have a couple more questions for you. I think I want to pivot to a topic that is fascinating as it is unnerving. Back in 1967, there was this U.S. Air Force ICBM launch officer named Robert Salas, who witnessed 10 nuclear warheads become disengaged, apparently by a large bright orange disk hovering silently at the gates of Malmstrom Air Force Base located right here in Montana. And having been there, I can't imagine what that must have been like. But 45 years later, we find these harrowing stories coming from America's best fighter pilots about interactions with UAPs that are frankly a little chilling. As chairman of the Appropriations Defense Subcommittee, have you been briefed on this topic behind closed doors? And do you think we have any information as to the origins of these anomalous objects?
So I have been briefed, and I don't know if I can tell you what I've been briefed on, but I will tell you, as much as I would lose sleep over what's going on in Israel right now, I don't think I'd lose a lot of sleep over this. And it's not because I don't believe in UFOs. I quite frankly do believe in UFOs personally. But I don't think there's any evidence out there that would suggest that they are a military threat to us if they do exist. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't investigate any sightings, any potential threat to our national security, known origin or unknown origin. And so, we just witnessed a Chinese spy balloon fly over Montana, a few months ago. The fact is we found out where that was from, and we told them they couldn't do it again. And we don't believe they have done it again, which is a good sign. And I think that when it comes to unidentified flying objects, UFOs, what they used to call them, they call them
UAPs, yeah.
They call them now UAPs now, I think. Then we ought to find out if they're real. Use the technology we have to find out if they're real. I always believe that if in fact they are real, we ought to be honest with the American people and let them know what it is. So that needs to happen if in fact. But I will tell you that at this moment in time, to my knowledge, there isn't a threat out there.
Good.
From those.
Yeah, that's great. Well, you sit on 5 different committees. You've gotten a lot of bipartisan bills passed in a time of political stalemates. You travel home regularly to tend to your family and farm. How on earth do you stay motivated and fuel your drive to keep grinding forward?
So I'm a Montanan. That's why. Montanans pride themselves in getting things done, and they pride themselves in hard work. They pride themselves in a handshake meaning something, and that your word is your bond. I'm a Montanan. And the fact is that this is the greatest country in the world. We happen to live in the greatest state in the greatest country in the world. And that's worth grinding away. That's worth getting up at 2 a.m. to catch a flight to come back to Washington, D.C. every Monday morning.
Oh my goodness.
That's worth when you get home at 1 a.m. on a Friday, 1 a.m. on a Friday, that you get up and you talk to the news media about what's going on that Friday morning, to let the people of Montana know what's going on through your eyes in Washington, D.C. And so we got a lot of people running for office who they really don't share Montana values. They don't understand what a hard day's work looks like. But the truth is as a Montanan, I appreciate it when Mike Mansfield and Lee Metcalf were fighting for me. Mm-hmm. And I was going to high school and college. And I'm going to take that work ethic that my parents taught me, that my grandparents inserted into my genes. And I'm going to work my butt off to make sure this country stays the best country in the world and our state stays the best state in that best country in the world.
Yeah.
And that's what motivates me.
Oh, that's amazing. Well, Senator, thank you again for your time. I wish you the best and look forward to 4 more years of you in the Senate come next year's election day. We'll be rooting for you. We'll certainly be supporting you.
It's 6, and I appreciate that.
Oh, it's 6.
And
Even better.
That's all right. Morgan, it's a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you very much to all your listeners. Hope if this airs before Veterans Day, I hope that you're able to show proper respect to our veterans because they deserve it. And if you are a veteran, thank you. And we're coming on the holiday seasons. We wish everybody a great Thanksgiving, a Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, all the above.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Hello.